So you want to own a private island. No neighbors, no noise, no permits to argue over with a zoning board that's never even seen the water you are standing in. Just you, a horizon, and a flag planted in sand that legally belongs to nobody but you. Here is the paradox. The asset that promises total isolation from the rest of the world is also the asset most completely dependent on it. Every drop of drinking water, every gallon of diesel, every replacement part for a broken generator has to be shipped, flown, or barged in from somewhere else, at a price that has nothing to do with how much money you have and everything to do with how far you are from the nearest port. That dependency is exactly what turns paradise into the most expensive liability a wealthy person can own. Stay with this, because the gap between the postcard and the balance sheet is where a surprising number of billionaires have quietly bled money for decades. Tier 1 is the bootstrapped play. A small underdeveloped cake somewhere in the Bahamas or off the coast of Central America. 1 to 5 acres, no fresh water source, no dock. $200,000 to $1.5 million gets you the deed and absolutely nothing else. No electricity, no structure, no way to get there except your own boat. Most buyers at this tier never build anything. They are purchasing a tax write-off and a story to tell at dinner parties, not an operating asset. The land itself is cheap precisely because nothing about turning it into a habitable property is cheap. And most owners quietly discover that math the first time they price out a barge to bring in a single load of gravel. Tier 2 is mid-market. The semi-developed private retreat, $10 to $50 million, buys you a larger island with a main residence, a generator system and a small staff compound, and usually a private airstrip or helipad. This is where the economics stop being theoretical. You now have year-round payroll, fuel contracts, and a maintenance backlog that grows every single month, whether you visit or not. This tier is where most owners first discover that the island didn't cost them a fortune. Keeping it running is what costs them a fortune. A caretaker couple alone can run 6 figures a year in salary and housing before a single guest ever sets foot on the dock. And the number only climbs once you add a boat captain, a groundskeeper, and someone who actually understands the generator. Tier 3 is institutional, the branded ultra-luxury resort island. $50 million add up, sometimes well past $250 million for an island built out as a full commercial resort with multiple villas and desalination plant, a marina that can run past $50,000 for the whole property. At this level, you are not buying a home, you are building a hospitality company that happens to be surrounded by water on every side, and every operational mistake becomes a 5-star review problem instead of a private embarrassment. Institutional buyers at this scale bring in professional resort management groups rather than running things themselves, because the skill set required to operate a floating luxury logistics chain has almost nothing in common with the skill set required to earn the fortune that bought the island in the first place. Here is the metaphor that actually explains this business. Think of a private island like a spacecraft that never leaves the ground. Astronauts can't call down for a missing bolt or a case of bottled water. Everything they will ever need has to be calculated in advance and physically carried up with them, because there is no corner store in orbit. A private island runs on the exact same logic. There is no just-in-time delivery. There is no calling a plumber who shows up in 20 minutes. Every single input, food, fuel, spare parts, stuff has to be provisioned, stockpiled, and shipped across water on a schedule that has nothing to do with your convenience. That's why the industry obsesses over 2 numbers most guests never think about: logistics chain cost and staff to guest ratio. Logistics chain cost is simply what it costs to move 1 pound of anything from the mainland to your dock, and on a remote island it can run 5 to 10 times the mainland price once you factor in barge charters and spoilage. Staff to guest ratio matters because ultra-luxury private islands routinely run 2 or 3 staff members for every single guest. Not because it's indulgent, but because there is no backup workforce 40 minutes away if someone calls in sick. You either overstaff permanently or you risk the entire operation on any given week. Here is the counterintuitive fact that breaks normal hospitality logic. An island resort that's completely empty can almost as much to run as one that's fully booked. Generators still need diesel to stay in test-ready condition. Destination equipment still needs power to keep the system from fouling. Staff still need to be paid and housed, because you can't lay off your electrician for the off-season and expect him to reappear the day you need him. Occupancy barely moves the cost side of the ledger. It only moves the revenue side, which means a slow season doesn't quietly break even. It actively bleeds cash while the postcard view stays exactly the same. Walk the physical design of one of these islands and you will notice almost nothing about it is decorative. The villas are scattered to create the illusion of total privacy, but they are actually positioned along a single hidden service road so staff can move food, linens and repair equipment without a guest ever spotting a golf cart. The infinity pool sits exactly where it blocks the sight line to the desalination plant, and the generator shed, because a guest paying $50,000 a night should never have to see the machinery keeping them alive. Even the placement of the dock is calculated, angled to shield the working cargo barge from the villa's ocean view while still keeping the unloading route as short as possible. Even the staff compound is positioned by calculation rather than convenience, tucked far enough from the guest villas that a generator hum or a delivery boat's engine never intrudes on the silence a guest is paying to experience, while still close enough that a repair crew can reach a broken air conditioner within minutes rather than hours. The invisible liability underneath all of it is weather exposure, and it isn't hypothetical. A single hurricane can take out a dock, a desalination plant, and half a season's bookings in one pass. And insurance for standalone island properties in hurricane corridors is both extraordinarily expensive and often incomplete, leaving owners self-insured against exactly the kind of total loss event a remote island is most exposed to. Now, the two ways this business actually kills its owners. The first is capital structure problem. Scrub Island, a luxury resort island in the British Virgin Islands, was built out with more than $100 million in debt and assets riding on it. On by 2013, its developer was forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a Florida court after disputes with its lender over how that debt would be handled. The resort itself was polished and photogenic. The financing behind it wasn't built to survive a slow stretch, and a slow stretch is exactly what remote luxury properties eventually get. The second failure mode is operational mismatch, and the most infamous case didn't even involve an island anyone actually owned outright. The Fear Festival promised guests a private island luxury experience in the Bahamas in 2017, built almost entirely on marketing footage rather than functioning infrastructure. There was no adequate housing, no working kitchen operation at scale, no logistics chain capable of feeding and housing the crowd that had been sold the fantasy. The failure wasn't a lack of ambition or a lack of a beautiful location. It was a total mismatch between what remote island logistics can actually deliver on a fixed timeline and what had been promised to people who had already paid. So here's the whole business collapsed into one sentence. Value equals isolation minus the compounding cost of everything. Isolation forces you to import. Run as serial commercial resort. A well-managed private island can post net margins in the 20 to 30% range. Respectable but nowhere near as generous as the postcard suggests, once staffing and logistics are accounted for. Richard Branson turned this math into an actual business with Necker Island, building a brand luxurious enough that guests happily absorb the true cost of isolation as part of the fantasy they are paying for. The system rewards exactly one kind of owner, someone who treats the island as a hospitality operation with a logistics problems, not a lifestyle purchase with a nice view. Everyone else is just an investor in diesel, salt, water and the electricians over time, paying dearly for the privilege of being the only person who has to think about any of it.